Hello. For this presentation on career inequalities, I am going to focus on professional mobility or career mobility because it's a central dimension of professional careers, a question which many social sciences have been focusing on with different points of view. So economists will look at wage mobility, change of companies, so external mobilities, and then also transitions between employment, unemployment, and inactivity. Sociologists focus mainly on social professional mobility, so promotions, etc., and then also those mobilities within companies. And so this is a pluridisciplinary theme, and there are different ideas that are circulating in society. People think that a stable career in the same company, that is over with, that everyone has to be mobile now, and this idea that mobility is positive. We often think of a mobile worker who is competitive, who is able to bounce from project to project. But what I'm going to try to highlight in this presentation is that we are not all equal when faced with career mobility, and I wanted to focus in particular on gender inequalities. So, the issue that I am going to deal with here today is are men and women equal when faced with career mobility? So I'm going to kill suspense right away. The answer is no. Based on the different dimensions of professional mobility that I mentioned earlier on, gender inequalities are still quite stark, and this is the case as it relates to wage mobility. So if you look at this graph, this is taken from a recent publication from Ined, and this demonstrates on the left-hand side that the careers of women are flatter than those of men. So the pay gap is widened throughout their careers, and on the right-hand side we can see that this is particularly the case between fathers and mothers, and this is the difference is greater between men and women who don't have children. So these wage gaps in the private sector is fairly stable, roughly 20% for full-time equivalents, and these gaps are no longer linked to the experiences, what economists call human capital. We need to remember that women are more educated than men, but they have the consequences of maternity, and this is what we call in literature the parental pay gap or the family pay gap. So, several works demonstrate that the career adjustments of women following birth explain the inequalities in remuneration between men and women. But there are also social professional inequalities as well. So, depending on gender, women are not promoted as much as men. And so, to illustrate this, I'm going to show you a graph which is taken from an article that we published in 2018 about the inequalities dependent on gender, and this was carried out in a large aviation company. And so they looked at the career of stewards and hostesses over the same period of time, and we can see that the year before some people were promoted, so we can't, at the beginning we can't see any inequalities. But over time, we can see that these gaps do widen, and at the end of the 18-year observation period, the steward is promoted twice as much as the hostesses. And we also were able to highlight that this was particularly the case for mothers. So being promoted, or their chances of promotion, decreased with the number of children they had, or according to the number of children they had. So we can see that there is this glass ceiling, an expression that explains that women's careers are stagnated at a certain point, or there is also another expression that explains that women remain for longer periods of time at the bottom of the echelons in their employment, at the bottom echelons in their employment. And so we can see that there are some convergences between masculine and feminine careers. So these two graphs demonstrate this. We can see on the left-hand side that there's an increase, a significant increase in terms of females in the active population. And then on the right-hand side, we can see that there's a rapprochement of unemployment rates. So for a very long time, there was significant unemployment among women, but this is no longer the case. And so it's roughly 9%, both for women and men now. And we can also see that there are some inequalities that remain, particularly as it relates to employment, because men and women don't take up the same employment. And so for men, things are very clear. Men are fairly well employed. There are part-time positions, and then for women the situation is different. So underemployment, or what we call underemployment, happens most among women. So these are women who want to work more and who are available to work, but cannot find any employment. Women are also represented in some areas, particularly as it relates to parental leave. And women are also affected by the unemployment halo, or so those are people who want to work but then are classed as inactive because they are not actively looking for work. And so we can see that there is a significant heterogeneity as it relates to the employment situation of men and women, and the indicators generally tend to make these differences indivisible. So in total, the mobility of men and women on the job market are very diversified, and this is more positive for men than it is for women. So this is something that is very interesting for researchers, that is to say the persistence of these inequalities. We can put forward a few factors to explain this. So there are three that I would like to explain. The first one is the choice of careers. So schooling of girls was very important, but also the mix of the different careers that were pursued was not improved. So we can see here that men represent almost 3/4 of student engineers, whereas for paramedical and social training, the women are represented at 85%. And so we can see that more women are in careers that aren't as well paid. The second other factor is the choice of training, as I said, but other things as well. So work in economics that demonstrates that women are more at risk and are unable to negotiate promotions and pay increases. Inequalities are also quite stark following birth, that is to say when women become mothers, and so this leads to the question as to the conciliation of family life and professional life. And so the two balances as it relates to the distribution of household tasks. So this difference is very stark, and you can see the figures here that women conduct 65% of household tasks and a high percentage of parental tasks. And so this can compromise a woman's job search. It could require her to take parental leave or to accept part-time jobs, but it also limits them in terms of promotion. And they cannot choose companies. They have to choose companies that offer perhaps more flexible working hours, but that don't pay as much. So these family determinants are essential for us so that we can explain the persistence of these inequalities between men and women. So for research, the challenge is to better understand these different mechanisms, and we have to understand the social transformations that are currently underway, and this means that we have to carry out new analyses on these inequalities. So we can see that there are transformations in terms of employment and work, and I'm thinking about the increase in precarious employment. There's also the development of digital tools, and this has encouraged networking, but also makes it unclear, makes the relationship between work and life, the work and life balance very, very unclear. So there's still some way to go in terms of equality. We can see that there are also other inequalities, such as aging. There is an increase in the number of people who are not in a situation of autonomy, and so there's also the perhaps in the future this conciliation of your the work-life balance won't just be applied to people's careers, but also as it relates to taking care of elderly parents. There are other legislative obligations for companies in terms of professional equality, and we need to evaluate and assess their effects. And in order to do this, we need to look at new data. So I just want to give you some corporate data. This is data that is several Ined researchers have collaborated on with the large companies that provide us with data, and this enables us to take a fine-tooth comb and analyze at what time HR practices have impact on these inequalities. So in the study that I cited earlier on, we were able to highlight that a change as it relates to promotion rules and encouraged men or favored men and went against women, because it favored what we call the availability or the investment of the company throughout one's career, so working full-time rather than working part-time, or availability in high seasons in the aviation industry, so during school holidays, for example. So this corporate data is interesting. We can see this, but we can see also their limitations. That is to say that by definition they only have information that interests companies for their personnel management, and so we don't have, for example, any information, or we have little information about the family constraints of employees, and we can see that that was very important for what we are looking for. And what we see in one company cannot be generalized for all companies, and so there remains the need to have more general data, longitudinal data from studies that enable us to follow individuals over time, so that we can take a look at and understand how these inequalities arise and how they are widened throughout people's careers and how they are linked to familial dimensions. And so we conducted another study, and this was focused on the link. It was called the employer and family study. To conclude, what are the takeaways? So we can see that there is a persistence of inequalities that relates to professional mobility. These inequalities are increased and reinforced throughout careers, and they have significant consequences in terms of the living conditions, retirement and health. We can see that there is significant issues as it relates to work-life balance for women, because birth or maternity has explained the majority of inequalities between the careers of men and women. So in order to better understand the mechanisms that are at the source of these inequalities, new data, in particular corporate data, but also administrative data, is required. But we also need to conduct new studies so that we can study the recent transformations of the society and to reduce the impacts of certain policies. Thank you very much.